Your starter today is to try and create this code. You need to do it into Tkinter, but notice when we're using Python idle, we're actually using a Pygame trinket. This is so it can support graphical user interfaces. So what is a GUI? You should know this already. There are lots of different types of graphical user interfaces and lots of types of interfaces. We've looked at command line interfaces, we've looked at all sorts of different interfaces, but one of the most popular ones is the graphical user interface. This allows the user to interact directly through graphics such as menus and buttons, and sometimes you'll have menu driven interfaces as well. There's also a number of libraries that can help us to build GUIs. We're going to be having a look at Tkinter. This comes standard with Python 3 and makes it simple to use. But there are other GUI libraries which you're allowed to use in your coursework, such as PyQt and WXPython. In fact, here are all the different options you could potentially use. We've already talked about Tkinter, but there's PySimple GUI, AppJar, PyQt, GUI0 and WXPython. Now to import a library you use from Tkinter import star. Remember, star is our wildcard, which means it's going to import all methods. Now you can use as many libraries as you want for your code, and you can use them in any way that you want. Now libraries are blocks of functions and procedures that you can import. You can't get credit for the work that's in the library, but you can use it for your own coursework. When creating a GUI, the first thing you're going to want to do is to create a window. I've assigned it to a variable name. I've called it window just to make it simple. So window equals TK with a capital T. You'll see a small box will appear on the screen when you create this. It's also fairly simple to add a title. We'd use window.title. Remember, window is my variable name for the box, the window that's going to pop up. And I've given it the title, My First GUI. The clever thing about Python is that it's going to use an event listener. In this case, it's the main loop. We want our program to continually look for any changes from the user. Now, if you remember when we were looking at interrupts, at this point the process might be moved onto the waiting stack. That's because we might have a series of buttons or input fields that we're waiting for an input for the user. Once that happens, it's added to a data structure in readiness for processing, usually a queue. This ensures that they're kept in order and are not overwritten. Remember our queue, our first in is our first out. And thinking about our scheduling algorithms, remember that we have our waiting queue. Now Python does a lot of this for us automatically, but if you're using other languages, you're going to have to put a lot more investment into ensuring things happen, and it waits for user input. Now you can see here I've put window.mainLoop. That main loop allows our computer now to sit in that ready state. Inside a graphical user interface in Tkinter, we can use what's called widgets. Now these are things like labels, buttons, text boxes or drop-down menus. There are others such as checkerboxes and radio boxes as well. We're going to have a look at a few of them and how you would add them, but at this stage I'm not going to be teaching you how to use each one. I'm going to be showing you the format of how they work so that you can investigate how they are run. It's important to realise that a window is split up into a grid using columns and rows. Each column and row is referenced by coordinates, with 0, 0 starting in the top left hand corner. Let's have a try with a label widget. A label widget is the simplest one, and you've already added one of these. It provides an area for some text to be displayed. To create a label, we use the command label. I've given it a variable name so that we can refer back to it in the future. So I've said label1 equals label. We then have a window object. We want to put it into our window. So that name, remember, that we associated with the box that pops up called window. And text in there as well, so enter something here. And finally, I'm using label1.grid to position it on our screen. So we've got 0 and 0. Try it and see what happens. Here's an example of an entry form widget. This allows us to place a box where somebody can type some text into it. You can see from the code I've given it another variable name. This is because we're probably going to want to reference this later. Let's say, for example, we've got a button and somebody presses the button and we want to collect the text from the input box. We have entry1 equals entry. So it's a type entry. And in our brackets, window, we're putting it into what we've called our window with a width of 20, and I've chosen a background colour of light green. That's not important, but it shows the different items that you can add in. Again, similar to the way that I use the label widgets, I then say entry1.grid and then decide position, row 1 and column 0. We can associate a sticky key with it as well. So, for example, the letter E. This is an example of a button widget. You can see button 1 is the name I've given it, is a type button. It's going to appear in our window, and the text it's going to say is submit. We want a width of 5, and then I've got a command. What do you think the command will do? Now, just think of JavaScript when we were learning about JavaScript. Whenever a button's pressed, we need to run some code or tell it what to activate. And in this point here, we'd put what function it's going to run. So remember, we're working in functions and procedures. It's going to run a certain function in Python. You can see the function that it's going to run is button click. And I've got some code in there just to collect what was in the input form and print that. Finally, we need to decide where we want our button to be on the screen. So I've got button1.grid and I'm going to put it in row 2, column 0. Here you can see what it looks like. We've got our button text as shown and what it will look like on the screen. And now I want you to add a button and an entry widget into your code. Another example is a text widget. And it does exactly what you'd expect it to do, similar to a label, but it gives us an area for some text. You can see the code here. Try this in your code. Now I left a large space for my text so that I could output some text when the button is clicked on. So you can see here I've chosen a new variable name called manipulated text and put that to you've just typed in and collected the text from the input field. I've then inserted that into my text box. As a small challenge, what I want you to do is to try and make a mini set of flashcards. I want you to have 5 different buttons with an area where when the button is pressed, the text will change, explaining what that key term is. Please complete this on Tkinter.